The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood for another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. Have a fun episode for you again in Southwest Florida. But before we get started, don't forget to like us and subscribe on the podcasting app of your choice. Follow us on social media. We're at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter, FL Beer Blog on Facebook, and Florida Beer Podcast and our sister site, FloridaBeerBlog.com. We're also a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com or search for FPN Insiders on Facebook. If you read the blog, on occasion, I do hang out at Hook Brewing in Naples. Kind of fond of it because the first time we went there was, I think, their first day of soft opening, actually. And we've seen it grow from a tiny little tap room between a smoothie place and a restaurant in a strip mall on Immokalee to a very large regional brewery with all sorts of awesome amazingness going on, especially after taking over that restaurant that it was next to and putting in a much better restaurant with a much better menu. So we're going to talk to the man behind the beers that have been powering that amazing growth. His name is William Vaughan. He was formerly a part of Bury Me Brewing in Fort Myers and is now the head of the brew house at Hook. There's a lot of exciting things to go over and a lot of good talk about what Hook was, what he sort of inherited, and what he's been doing to not only get them through COVID and the quarantine, but also the incredible growth that they've been experiencing. Enjoy. Let's take it back to when you first came into Hook, because Hook was established for a couple of years before you came on board, but it was just a tap room. And then eventually, with the current ownership, they took over the restaurant next door and transformed it into something a little bit better than what it was here in the original space. When you came in, I guess, where was everything in terms of the growth of the brand? Was it still everything was going to be produced and distributed and sold in this particular room? Or what was starting to happen in Southwest Florida for Hook?
Well, when I took over, it was draft only, and then to go, obviously, crowlers, growlers. We had a huge partnership with a local restaurant chain called Pinchers, which is actually the restaurant, the brand, it's owned by the Phelan family brand. That's Pinchers, Texas Tony, and Deep Lagoon. So that was kind of the crux to Dan, the half owner here, the operating owner, taking over and investing in the business, was to take that to the next level with them. So they had 13 or 14 restaurants that we were supplying beer to, and it was their brand. As far as like the Pinchers brand, it was in more of like a collaboration with Hook. And so when I took over, we were doing draft out of the tap room, draft and distribution, and then the Phelan brands of beers. The Hook brand had been somewhat suffering in the market due to a couple different reasons. So there was a lot of emphasis on trying to kind of build the Hook brand back to where it needed to be. And there was a lot of emphasis on making a lot of the products more profitable. Some of the design initially, they weren't necessarily the best profitable beers. So those were the tasks I took over. And then with the shutdown, of early last year, Pinterest didn't, we lost basically 14 restaurants that were huge impact on our business. When they had to shut down too and lost 50% of their business for the next 6 months, that caused us to step back and reevaluate much deeper into what we were looking to continue to do. So those were the problems I faced right away when I took over, and then I ended up falling into. So a lot of those were, things that I needed to focus on.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that there were some, business issues with the original Bone Hook, because I've noticed, that is a story, as we mentioned off the microphone, that it's happened a few times in this area. And do you think that, I guess not just Southwest Florida, but Florida craft beer and just craft beer in general, that a lot of the times when the people that are coming into it and trying to create the business don't have a business background and just do the home brewing side and want to do that, do you think that there's a lot that is lost in the move from home brewing operation to an actual business with employees and
absolutely
things?
Yeah, for sure. That's been, I think, one of the things that in talking to and reading about and seeing in the industry, that always is a huge problem, that most people are used to, when you make 5 gallons at home, who cares if it's so much cheaper anyway. So who cares if you spend a little extra money? But when you start to scale those things up, and you can look at it, well, malt and hops are, this much, but, you also have all the other expenses, the employees and all that, and, insurances and all that. So that's a big part. And then whenever one of the big problems with breweries back in the day was that they would open as restaurants. So there was the big push in Florida to open as a tap room, because in a lot of states you can't do that. In a lot of states you can't just serve alcohol at your location. Well, we had the advantage here in Florida that we were able to open as a tap room through the tourism clause. Yeah. So that helped a lot to be able to facilitate that. You didn't have to focus on a restaurant. But what's happening now, we see a lot of these breweries are realizing that they're having food trucks come in. The food trucks are making a pretty decent profit off of it. It helps the brewery too, because it retains customer duration, visits. So that helps. But at the same time, a lot of the breweries are saying, well, we have the area, we have the space, we have the customers. Why don't we open the kitchen too? So it's been a gradual process for a lot of breweries to do that.
And I guess my big question is, especially when you've got an operation like Bone Hook, because you've got the brewing system, but now you've got this restaurant concept. For all intents and purposes, it's a brew pub. When does one influence the other? Like, does the brew house have the greater influence over the restaurant side, or does the restaurant side have the greater influence over the brewing side?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I'm not positive. I know that we kind of put them, they're equal. We want good food, we want a good environment, but Dan has said multiple times, let's not forget that we're a brewery and we sell beer, because especially with the big seltzer push, it's all these people want to get into all these different products. And at the end of the day, Dan and I have sat down and said, we're a brewery, we sell beer. We also have a cider license, and I started doing the ciders, but really the focus is the beer and the brewery.
And so you came in here, obviously the restaurant was here, but you also had, I guess, the ghost of the original Bone Hook. With the recipes, with the image, you hinted on this a little bit. How much of this did you retool? And then how much of it was, we have the Bone Hook brand, we're going to take it in a completely different direction. Let's start erasing what the old Bone Hook used to look like.
Quite a bit of that occurred, especially at the beginning of 2020 with the shutdowns. There was, we realized pretty quickly that we didn't even really have a brand. Bone Hook had a logo, but there wasn't any branding really. When we started looking at the whole concept of packaging, we knew we needed some branding. So that's where we have, had kind of grew into that. As far as what I inherited and some of the changes that I've made in the brewery, I stepped back and, obviously I took over, 2 years or almost 3 years into an operation that was already here. So I was inheriting recipes and brew, beers and everything. So there were some things that I knew right away I wanted to change, but those changes we had to be very careful, and we had to change them subtly, because what we didn't want to do was take, one of the first things I was asked to do was make, our main IPA that at the time was Dirty Dave's more profitable. They barely made any money off of that beer. So I sat down with it and I said, well, here's what we need to do. And so those changes were complicated because you needed to retain the customer's interest in that product that was one of the number one selling beers, and at the same time make it more profitable. So I've made small changes here and there, and then honestly the shutdown kind of helped us because it put a lot of people hadn't been in for months, and so we were able to make some big changes. And then when people came back, they didn't even realize or recognize if there was any difference in taste but the main things that most people noticed was that the branding was different. There was a renewed sense of excitement, I think, between Dan and I. We had been through our first year, almost a year together, and we were really starting to gel well, and we were starting to see a lot of the things that we needed to be cohesive on come together. So branding, beer styles, beer quality, and then the packaging. So we bought the canning line, and so that's just been tremendous for us.
Gotcha. And obviously with this new branding, you did create sort of an overarching look, and we'll definitely talk about that here in a little bit. But why was it decided not to just move away from Bonehook completely, to change the name? We used to be Bonehook, and now we're, something else. Why did you decide to keep that name, but still create a new, I guess, image?
I think creating a whole new name would be complicated and confusing. You have to change all your licenses over. So then, that would have been quite the undertaking. And we're happy with the brand of Bonehook itself. The main logo, the brand itself, the name is good. It's flexible. So, I don't think there was any need for us to tackle quite that big of an undertaking. And being that it had been operation with Dan for, and myself for a year, it didn't really, I guess, make sense for us to change it overall. I just think it needed more identity.
Gotcha. And that identity comes courtesy of, I guess, what is his name?
The tattoo artist Chooch is he goes by Chooch, but yeah, he's been helping us a lot with the artwork for Bonehook. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I will admit, if I think about the Naples area, tats are not what first come to mind, but you've got sort of, if your your Iron Maiden-esque grinning skull has sort of become the focus of everything. And you held a name contest for him, correct?
Yeah, we did. We at the beginning, you're right. We had our logo guy, our mascot. So we had that, and yeah, that was one of the things that we kind of took that, and then we were like, well, we can take Mr. Skull Guy, and it's simple branding to change the glasses and to put a hat on him and to change the background rather than to come up with an entire new landscape every time for a brand. So it was more born out of necessity of keeping it simple, and it worked for everybody, to just roll with that.
And as we're talking, we're sitting in front of a giant flag poster, I guess, of both Liquid Laugh and...
those are towels.
Oh, towels.
Beach
nice.
towels, yeah.
Beach towels, there we go. Of Grateful Head and Liquid Laugh, and you've got the Boney, I think his name is, on those. And I guess Grateful Head has sort of become the new signature of Bonehook. Was that intentional, or was that...
Yeah, it was originally called the Hook Light, and we kind of wanted to pull back from the Light moniker, and it didn't really have much personality. And then when he came up with the Grateful Head, that really had a lot of personality and was able to give it a lot more identity. So, and then the beer itself is it's a 4.2 light lager, so it's just extremely approachable, and then give it the cool logo and name. So I think we kind of were pretty happy with the way that came together.
That's kind of amazing. And so obviously here we are, we're starting to get out of the pandemic. We've definitely noticed very few face masks at all in Naples over the past couple of days.
Yeah.
As you mentioned before, you really had to pivot towards packaging, towards a bigger focus of packaging. And now your packaging is found a lot more areas of the state. You've got people representing your brands and package on the shelf over in the Fort Lauderdale area. Right. How difficult was that pivot, knowing that you weren't going to be bringing in extra tanks and extra equipment in the actual brew house side?
Oh, that wasn't too bad because, like I said, we had a lot of capacity freed up with the loss of the Pinchers brands. You know, we have some of their restaurants back online now, but we still don't have the full portfolio of them, and that's actually good for us because, you know, we have the ability to really focus on the Hook brand again, like I said, and packaging is a big part of that. You know, so now it's not too difficult.
It almost sounds like that was a good growth opportunity back in the early days, and now it's almost like, and I don't want to say this and put words in anybody's mouth, but almost like you don't need them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wouldn't say we don't need them, but it's difficult to build your brand around a company that is 70% of your product, and then because at any moment that company could decide to leave. I was back when I was a lot younger, I was in a factory setting, and our main customer was Packard Electric, and we made parts for Packard Electric. They were 95% of our business, and slowly throughout the years, they started to try to do that more in house. And at one point, I had actually left the company by this time, but they at one point had said, "Hey, we're going to do all our own product in house." So that company went out of business because that company they relied on was 100% of their product. So, you know, almost 100%. So it's always a good thing to be able to make sure that you have that freedom to be able to take things in the direction you need to take them.
That's perfect. I was saying, so I guess, why was the decision made, or how was the decision made to increase distribution and to really start getting the name into a significant multi-county footprint?
That was more just the opportunity to be able to do it. We actually had a change in distribution, and we were working with a smaller distributor at the time that was based out of Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. So we had that ability. And then on top of that, one of our guys that was working with us, the great Bobby Gordash from the Holy Mackerel notoriety.
He's a colorful character. I will definitely say that.
So he was on board before all that happened, and then, you know, he lives over there, so it's just a natural progression to put more product in his market and let him move it in that direction. And then, of course, there's so much growth potential because the area is so big and there's so many people there. So that's a good opportunity to hit a big audience in itself.
Now, are you specifically, when it came time to really produce the canning, did you want to focus on just a couple of core brands? Because obviously Laid Back Lager is everywhere. The cider is everywhere. But every so often, you know, we'll get things like Wicked Seas, which I know is not a year. That's not a year-round.
Yeah, it's a year-round.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
How did you decide which ones would go into greater distribution, and how did you decide which ones will be canned, but really only be for either Collier County or just that cooler that's about 10 steps away from where we're talking right now?
So the cooler typically is, you know, obviously all the brands, everything we make can go in there. But a lot of times, if we're doing more of a taproom exclusive, if it's experimental, if I only made, say, 8 barrels of it, and we're going to, maybe put out 25 cases and we're going to sell it in-house, we're not likely to send it out into the market if that's the case, because we don't have so much to send out. We make more money from products in-house always. So when you have the opportunity to sell 6-packs here, it's a better profit margin for any brewery. So it's a good business move. And that's why you see so many breweries who, if they can only sell it in their tap room, they do, because it doesn't make sense to send it out into distribution if you don't need to. But we did kind of focus on what were our top sellers. So we kind of sat down with our list of all our brands, and we said, okay, here are the top 10, and these top 6 make the most sense to package and put out on a constant basis. And then from there, we started getting into the seasonals and limited releases. Island Breeze, the coconut lime lager, that was born out of an idea, and we tapped it at the tap room, and people were really excited about it. So we decided to package it. We did like 25 cases, and it sold out, in a blink of an eye. So then I did a 50 case, and then we dropped, like 25 cases into the market, and next thing you know, all the customers were wanting it. So now I'm trying to produce a lot of it, but it's definitely, and it's funny because it's basically the laid back lager, the Grateful Head. That's what it is. And then I take a batch of that and I split it in half, and I add shaved unsweetened coconut and lime concentrate to it. So
that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
it sounds like it would have been perfect for the beach yesterday.
Yeah, it's a great beach beer because the coconut and lime are not overwhelming. They complement the beer. So it just makes it so refreshing.
And do you find a lot of surprises in terms of bringing beers like that to the Naples market, things that you may not necessarily assume are going to be a big hit all of a sudden explode?
I wouldn't say that I was or expected to be surprised by the Island Breeze. We kind of knew that was going to be a home run. I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that because I'm not sure that I've been surprised by much. I guess I've been in the industry long enough to know that sometimes you never know what to expect. So there are people who are surprised to see that we have the Liquid Laugh Belgian Triple in a can and year round.
That actually is surprising. It's a great beer. Don't get me wrong. It's phenomenal, but it doesn't seem like it's a very Naples beer, and it doesn't seem like it's a beer that you see year round in cans, especially coming from a Florida brewery.
Yeah, and we get that a lot. People say, all the time, I can't believe you guys actually have a Belgian Triple that you put out, but it sells really well. We do really, really well with it. And so I was a bit surprised as to just how well it did. And like you said, it's a great beer. I love that beer. Quality wise, who doesn't love a classic Belgian Triple? But just to see that beer do as well as it does in the market is pretty, it always amazes me.
Awesome. Now, obviously, things are starting to pick up. The restaurants are now opening. Things are coming back to life and a little bit more back to normal. Does that concern you when it comes to the amount of volume that you're still able to push through your tanks? Are you able to keep up or possibly even increase distribution with everything else kind of coming back online? Or are you looking at bringing the distribution down for a little bit so that everything else can, your restaurant side and whatnot can catch back up?
No, we could easily expand production. We are nowhere near capacity. We have the potential annual capacity of about 9,000 barrels per year, and we're nowhere near that. So we have the infrastructure in place that we could expand pretty much exponentially. What we would need to be manpower at that point. I'm the only person in the brewery right now. I do have someone who comes in and helps me can, or he cleans kegs. So the next step is to get him trained on more cellaring work and that sort of thing, and then maybe get an assistant brewer in here. So we've talked about what are our next steps for manpower back there, because we believe it's inevitable. We're going to grow from here, and we have the infrastructure in place. That's always nice to have a big brewery with large equipment. It's nice to be able to grow into that, and that's one of those situations for breweries who are starting out. Do you start small and then expand, or do you start big and grow into it? So there's pros and cons into both of that. If you start small, you grow out of that equipment. Now you need to order new equipment and install it. That takes time. It takes money. And if you take the capital at the beginning and buy big equipment, you can grow into it, but it's harder to brew small batches out of it. So, those are the things you have to look at as you start up. And I was lucky enough that it was all set up here. So at this point, I could add probably maximum maybe like 5 people in the brewery, and then I think we would probably be maxed out there. But again, we would be close to 9,000 barrels a year, so we could be like lower half of Florida saturation, before we maxed out our equipment.
And what I find interesting is that you are in essence a production brewery over there, but this is still a strip malt. And so my big question has always been one of zoning. Mm-hmm. It's like, how can you produce and distribute in what is essentially a strip mall across the street from a hospital? 2 doors down is one of my favorite Thai restaurants in the state of Florida. Nothing bad about the food here, obviously.
No, yeah, right.
Was that difficult? Do you still continue to run into difficulties as you continue to try and hopefully expand the production that you have here, not just from the people that are here in the plaza, but from Naples and from Collier County itself?
No, so you asked about being in the strip plaza and the zoning, and one of the things when you're, this was one of the first businesses to open in this plaza. So the plaza was built with Bone Hook in mind, actually. So the zoning probably was arranged long before the brewery even was built and putting product out. That's the benefit of being able to pre-plan like that. So 90% of the time when you're looking to open a new place, you have to look at the zoning. What's the current zoning, and can we... There are certain zonings that you can just jump into and do what you need to do. And if it isn't set up already like that, as with the current zoning, there are always ways to change it. The most difficult thing with changing zoning with alcohol sales is churches and schools and daycares. So those are the most difficult problems that you face. But here, again, like I said, it was probably already here. And then as far as, like I said, we're about 9,000 square foot here, about 9,000 barrel a year potential here. So we would run out, and we don't have room to add much more. We're pretty maxed out on the equipment in this area, in this location. So we do have that in mind too, and we do have our eyes kind of fixated on finding, a larger facility somewhere, and maybe in a strip plaza, maybe a standalone. So those are discussions that happen, occasionally with that in mind, that that you can't grow exponentially here. It's not untapped growth.
Which brings me to the question that I kind of wanted to end up with is, if you, as you do continue to grow and as you do continue to possibly look at other things, is it Naples that you would look at? Has Naples been good to you, and is it continuing to be good to you, or would you want to expand outside of Collier County?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't even know if I can answer that. Naples has been good to us. We would always have the restaurant here, and I imagine if we did take production elsewhere, it would be more of a factor of affordable land and being able to utilize the resources better somewhere. But I don't imagine this restaurant would go anywhere. In fact, I know it wouldn't go anywhere. And we would likely, if we were to take the large scale production out, we would always most likely would have a pilot batch system here. So those are things that we've looked at. We've looked at pricing into pilot batch systems. What would that cost? Where would we put it? Do we have space currently? And, we have 100% faith in the Naples market. We don't even have a specific location picked out. So I can't say that it wouldn't be in Naples. And some of those decisions, above my pay grade. So.
All right. Well, I will let you get back to brewing, as I know you're going to be heading out pretty soon. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Yeah. Thanks for having us, and keep up the good work.
So Bone Hook has a lot of amazing plans, a lot of amazing beers, including some things that we didn't get to talk about on the record. Hopefully I'll be able to release that information pretty soon. Interesting though it is. We're going to be coming back next week with a couple of other amazing interviews. Hopefully you will join us then. Thank you so much, and drink Florida Craft.